Now, thousands of people coming to South Africa from war-torn countries or rife countries with political unrest say they live in constant fear of being arrested. This is despite numerous attempts, some since 2020, to apply for asylum at the Department of Home Affairs. According to leaders of immigrant communities in Diepsloot, they are aware of at least 15 people currently being held at the Lindela Repatriation Center due to their inability to access asylum documents. To unpack this conversation further, we're joined by Nabila Mia, who's the head of penal reform at Lawyers for Human Rights. Nabila, thank you so much for joining us this evening. If you could just kindly take us through the plight of asylum seekers in South Africa.
Thank you so much for having me and the opportunity to share this information with you. So what we see in our clinics at Lawyers for Human Rights and those of our partners who work in the refugee and migrant rights space is that we are constantly receiving requests for help from asylum seekers who visit the refugee reception offices across the country and in many instances cannot get through that first step to have their asylum application adjudicated or seen to by a refugee status determination officer. In some instances, they'll go there and they'll get appointments they'll get appointments in 2025. Some, I think, even in 2026, which, as you know, someone that is fleeing, war-torn country is already in a situation where their life is in upheaval. They fled for their life. And now they have to wait till 2025 or 2026 for an opportunity to get documented or to even have their claim seen to. And so that puts them at risk of being detained pending deportation, because sometimes they attend the refugee reception centers and they've gone multiple times, they've woken up early multiple times, and there's no proof to show that they've actually been there. So when they're stopped by the police officers and asked for, or immigration officials and asked for documentation, they can't actually show that they've been to the refugee reception offices because no proof has been provided to them. In some instances, we also have clients who can't show that how they've gotten into the country, because people are, as you know, taken advantage, vulnerable people are taken advantage of on the way to South Africa, and they're told to get into the country in certain ways. And when they reach a refugee reception office, they're then seen by an immigration official who asks them how they got into the country. And first of all, there might be a language barrier, but there's no accounting for the vulnerability that people go through on the way to South Africa. And when they get there, they can't account for the fact that, their claims aren't assessed by the merit of the asylum claims. Rather, the immigration officials look at how they came into a country. And if they find that it's not satisfactory, they'll deport someone, notwithstanding the fact that they might be deported back to instances where their lives will be in danger.
And just speaking of just that long period as well, that long waiting period, you're saying some waiting up until having dates for 2025, 2026. What happens to them in the interim should the authorities catch them in the country?
If they cannot show proof of documentation, then the police or immigration officials will detain you and can either charge you with what is called a Section 49 offense under the Immigration Act, which is one of the offenses of not having documentation. Then you get, and that's a criminal charge, and thereafter you can get detained even further pending deportation. And so you suffer the risk of deportation back to your country of origin. And in instances where that is an asylum seeker that's facing that risk of deportation, we call that the refoulement, and should someone be sent back to a war-torn country where they suffer risk of harm to themselves, and that includes death, rape, abuse, etc., etc., South Africa would then be in violation of the principle of non-refoulement.
And just if we could just talk about some of the cases, you were just painting out or the plight and how they need to go about, and sometimes going to the offices and not finding them open. I know also during COVID and the lockdown period, it was a very difficult time as well, because a lot of people would then get to the offices and they would be closed. But now, of course, we don't have those restrictions anymore. But it seems that we still have those system errors as well, where people are making their way to the relevant authorities, to the relevant offices, but they aren't able then to get that help when they arrive there. And in some cases, I want to refer to one case of Ahmed, who was a 24-year-old Ethiopian man, where he went to the offices and, in fact, to find out about his case. And what happened there was he was arrested.
Yes, that's it exactly. I recently have heard of cases at refugee reception offices where people are too scared to even go there because, and this is unofficial word that we can't verify, but I can very well believe, because we see the aftermath of it, that the practice is just to arrest people, not actually looking at their claim for asylum. People go to the refugee reception offices seeking help, but then they face the risk of detention, because there's this automatic assumption that people aren't coming as valid asylum seekers. And, the very nature of a refugee reception office is so people can have a form of of refuge and at least have their claims, tested to see whether they're valid or not. And so I can imagine that people are now, communities are too scared to actually go to the reception offices, because they have fellow friends, family members that have been arrested when they've gone with everything in order to seek refuge.
And speaking of those who may be too scared as well to go to those offices, I'm assuming then they also come to you and seek help from you. How many people have sought help from you as lawyers for human rights? And what pictures do those numbers paint?
Look, our walk-in offices that we at Lawyers for Human Rights have over and we have offices in Pretoria, Johannesburg, Durban, and a satellite office in Messina. Since 2020, we've had tens of thousands of people visiting our offices as having issues with either getting their foot into the door to access asylum. And these are people that have also fled their countries based on their sexual identity, sexual orientations, and gender identities. People from Uganda, Ghana, who we know it's not safe for them to come back. So 2020, we've seen tens of thousands of people coming to our offices for assistance. And, we can try and intercede, and we do try every single day, but it's very much a systemic issue that needs to be resolved at the Department of Home Affairs. And we know that plight not only being something that faces asylum seekers and refugees, but also South Africans. Last year, recently, our officers won a case around the issues of blocked IDs. People going into banks and to draw money, and then finding out that there's a mark on their ID, and then their IDs are then blocked. So this is, we try to assist people on an individual basis through detention, through liaising with the Department of Home Affairs, but there's obviously systemic issues that need to be resolved, that we are trying to see how we might assist and also apply our skills towards resolving.
Now, as lawyers for human rights, you've raised concerns with the frequency of cases where asylum seekers are being arrested. Also, just talk to us about the difference here with asylum seekers and those who are trying to be here legally so and cannot actually go back to their own homes. These aren't illegal immigrants who are trying to get into the country and live undocumented.
No, so asylum seekers are people who come into South Africa seeking refuge, where should they be returned to their countries of origin, they fear persecution based on either their own belonging to a social grouping or based on their religion or sexual orientation or gender identities, or because the state of war in their countries. And their claims for refugee status have not been finally decided on, which is what distinguishes asylum seekers from refugees. Refugees, their asylum claims have been decided by the Department of Home Affairs, and they've been granted with refugee status. But asylum seekers are either those who are who have yet to ask for asylum or present themselves at a refugee reception office based on their asylum claims, or people who have presented themselves but are waiting for a final outcome and determination of their asylum claims. So the Refugees Act very explicitly says that someone who is an asylum seeker cannot be detained or deported or prosecuted for an infraction under the Immigration Act until you decide on their claim. And so it's not through any fault of their own that they do not have documents if they have been trying to access refugee reception offices and to have their claims adjudicated.
Thank you so much for that clarity as well, Nabila, and sharing your time with us this evening. That's Nabila Mia from Lawyers for Human Rights.